Well, it's Dominion Day Eve, and the City of Toronto and Costi Immigration Services is hosting a pre-Canada Day party right here at High Park. Not for citizens, mind you, but for Syrian refugees. In any event, let's find out how this cultural integration is coming along right now. Now tell me, I'm wondering, for the Syrian refugees coming here, do you think most of them buy into Canadian values, you know, freedom, law and order, equality?
Yeah, for sure. And like every Syrian people, like they're really happy in Canada because like they're safe.
Are you a refugee from Syria, sir?
Yes.
Tell me, do the Syrian refugees in Canada, do they support Canadian values?
I like everything connected with Toronto, with Canada. For first time, Canada, I started to cry. I remember my country.
Do you like the Canadian culture, the Canadian values here?
Yes, I like.
Do you like living under Canadian law, or would you rather there was Sharia law here?
Yes, the Canadian law.
Would you say that most Syrian refugees buy into Canadian values, you know, gender equality, democracy, this sort of thing?
Yep, of course.
Is there any concern, though? I mean, you're familiar, of course, with the reports of refugees coming into Canada illegally from the U.S. In other words, not at border crossings, but going across farmer fields. And I'm just wondering what the vetting is in terms of the security of who these people are.
The vetting of all people who enter into the country has always been heightened. It was heightened with the Syrian refugee resettlement. It's heightened with people who are what we call inland asylum seekers. What you and your listeners need to know is that the numbers that we're seeing who are crossing the borders in places like Manitoba and Quebec are by no means out of the norm for what we've seen in previous years. In fact, they're below the norm for what we've seen in previous years.
At the end of the day, sir, wouldn't you like to see that loophole closed that allows for this to happen? Because basically the way it is right now, as long as you walk across the border into Canada, you're here as a refugee, and a lot of people have a problem with that. Would you not like to see the law tightened so it would prevent this from happening in the future?
Inland asylum seekers are part of all international nations' refugee processes that have signed on to the Geneva Convention.
Your government does indeed support this loophole, allowing this kind of refugee travel into Canada.
Our government supports, as I've said to you already, a compassionate and open and welcoming refugee policy. That is what we stand for. That is what we were elected on. That is what Canadians have shown with their outpouring of support for the Syrian refugee movement. Thank you very much.
One last question, sir. Well, Mr. Varani apparently had to be somewhere very quickly, which is too bad, because that one last question I had for him was, yes, Canada is a nation of immigrants, but how does he and his government feel about those would-be immigrants to Canada that are lining up, following the rules, going through all the procedures and protocol, and waiting years to become Canadian citizens, whereas we've seen dozens of people walk across the border and having their Canadian citizenship fast-tracked, even though they got here illegally. Can you give us an idea of the ostensible policy reason, Mayor Tory, for this kind of a party?
Well, I think that as you help people to settle in, and we want these refugees to be successful in Toronto, we want them to be successful at integrating into our city and becoming a full part of the economic and political and cultural and social life.
And Mayor, you've said the word integrate a lot of times. There's been numerous reports in media outlets of Syrian refugees acting out violently, domestic abuse, violence in the schools. Is that a concern that some of these people coming into our city aren't going to embrace Canadian values?
Not at all. I can't comment on particular things that you mentioned, but I will say if you go back again in the history books that when the Vietnamese refugees were first here, there were some issues that arose out of their efforts to integrate and the difficulties posed by that for newcomers to Canada who came from horrific circumstances. But I will just say that if we help them to integrate, there's a much lesser likelihood that we'll have that kind of thing happen, and a much greater likelihood we're going to have huge success stories.
Well, as the pre-Canada Day party winds down, Mayor Tory did remark that over the previous decades, this city and this country has received refugees from Vietnam, Sri Lanka, and Uganda, and more or less it has been a success in terms of integration. Will the winning streak continue when it comes to the refugees from Syria? Only time will tell. For the Rebel.media, I'm David the Menzoid Menzies. Like what you just saw? Then click subscribe below and never miss another Rebel video.